Dwayne's a antique auctioneer. He's also a full-time auctioneer for 17 years. He's a freelance antiques columnist and a credential appraiser. And he's going to be talking tonight about some of the things that he's auctioned off. He's going to be back in the fall of 2019. He's going to look over things that people bring in that think is worth something. So, Mr. Tuscula.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. And for those, oh yeah, thanks. Need this. So for those of you who are interested in auctions or estate sales, I'll just leave this here if anybody's interested, and I'll leave a few cards here too if you're interested. But I'll just give you a brief background about how I became interested in antiques. And my father had worked full time, but he had a little book business on the side, and he would get the Antique Trader. He dealt a lot in antiquarian books, and so I would look at it when I was a kid, and I looked at other things. I was more interested in sports collectibles, and my father was a World War II vet, so military insignia and coins and things like that, and kind of lost interest up until through high school and college. But my neighbors started going to yard sales when I was in my late 20s, and rekindled my interest. I became a dealer about 30 years ago, and started my business, Central Mass Auctions, about 17 years ago, a little over, and I've enjoyed it ever since. And so I'm going to present a little about some of the things that are sold at auction, some of the things maybe that are in your house that are of interest to you. And I should just start off by saying that this presentation usually runs a little longer, but I'm an auctioneer, so I can talk fast. So I'm gonna get through it quicker for you. But if we could just hold off on the questions to the end, that would be great. And so we'll start off by just telling you some of the things that make what makes something valuable. And I'm going to jump to this side, make sure everybody can see it. So age is an important thing, but it's not the only thing that matters. But we sold some Byzantine and coins from the Roman Empire, and a big bag of them brought about $500. And in the same auction, I had a silver dollar that was a rare date that brought over $3,000. So it's not, age isn't the only determining factor. Condition is always important, though. The collectors want everything as perfect as possible. If they can get it in the original box with the toy collectors, for instance, that's going to be important to them. Form is something that's desirable. You want the nicest shaped piece. You want the most detailed, typically. The value of the materials is huge. So if you have a set of sterling silver flatware, you know it's going to be worth at least the melt price on it. So sterling is 92.5% pure, and say that I know it's selling for more, but just use a $10 figure for easy math. So you know that it's going to be worth $9.25 an ounce. Then a troy ounce, which is a little different than you're going to be on your postal scale, but just to give you an idea. But if it's a rarer piece, if it's more ornate, it's going to be worth a lot more money. If you get something made by Paul Revere, then it's going to be worth a lot more money than that. Trends in geographical location are important, but I'd say less so now because of the internet. You can sell things online and you find the right buyers. But I had a person call me up once, said that they had a desk that was used by Mother Goose when she was writing some of her books, but he was in New Mexico and he thought that New England would be a better market for that. But on the other hand, if you've got Navajo blanket, it might sell better in the Southwest. But it all comes down to desirability, and it changes a lot. And we're going to talk a little more as explain a little more about what makes things desirable and what's hot right now. But I'm going to be the bearer of bad news first, because we're going to talk about some of the things that maybe used to be worth a lot more money and have dropped, but it gets better at the end. So bear with me. So the Forbes did an article. Sorry, nobody wants your parents' stuff, and so that a lot of people, younger people, don't want traditional furniture. It might have been a nice piece that Henriton piece that you picked up, or an Ethan Allen furniture, and they're looking for IKEA, and so unfortunately. Prices have dropped because the supply, there's a lot of decedent estates, a lot of baby boomers, supplies here, and the demand is down here, so you have to have the right price point to sell it. And other things that aren't selling well, China, even Limoges, nice pieces of china that people coveted. The market's just not there anymore. And glassware also has taken a dip.
What about antique kerosene lamps, whale oil lamps, or lighting devices before the electric light bulb in general?
Those.
Because I have collections of those at home, and I think they're very valuable.
Yeah, there's some of the things that are holding up that are holding up well, and I can.
That would be like early lighting devices that are holding up well.
Yeah, and if you could just remind me that at the end, once we get through this, want to make sure I get through this fast, but I'll answer that question and better than any other ones that anybody has. So other things that younger people consider: dust collectors, Hummels. We used to be able to put those in an auction. Sometimes you get 100, sometimes 50. Now you put 10 in a box to get 100. This is just to amplify what I told you earlier. This is from the Globe, and they're saying pretty much the same thing. Baby boomers are downsizing. The kids won't take the family heirlooms, and it's unfortunate because I know a lot of people would like to pass things on to family members, but just living situations have changed too. Sometimes people are living in, younger people living in smaller places. They don't have the room to put those kind of things, but it's a lot of times it's just not their style. So here's some clocks. We'll start with some of the things that are sold at auction, and this is one of the that's right. I've got the. I'm gonna make sure I push the right button. So these are some clocks. Things to look for. This looks like it may be marble, but it's not. It's wood, and it's covered. This is a plastic one. That's wood. Slate marble one's worth a little more, but the market for clocks is one of the things. Like I said, I'm going to give you the bad news first. Has dropped a lot. Most people have a clock on their cell phone, and they don't use clocks anymore. They just and there are a lot of upkeep with the older clocks. They're just not as desirable. So this one, I think at the time sold for a little over $100, but I'd expect it to sell for less now. This one was maybe $75, same thing. So just to give you a general idea on those. I did talk about Hummels. This one, we got a big collection once out of a New Hampshire estate. And this one was a little bit more desirable. It had the original box, and it was a good size one. I think the figures were about 8 inches high. So at the time, that was sold for over $500. I think it might have been even $7. But I would expect it to be worth less. There are things you can look for with Hummels. They have an original crown mark, was one of the first marks to come out. Then they had Bs. They had a full B and a stylized B with a V in it. So the age will make a little difference, but unfortunately, like I said, that market's passed quite a bit now. Here's Roseville pottery. A lot of people got this as gifts before. And so when you look at a piece of Roseville, you can check the bottom, and it'll tell you, it'll typically have two numbers. It'll might say 183-8, and that 183 is the pattern, and in this case these don't, but just to give you an idea. So 183 would be the pattern, which would, this is pine cone, and it would be 8 inches. So they're pretty easy to research. You can look them up, but the market again has dropped on these, but these are more desirable. These are older ones, and they have almost a deco look to them, so those pieces are more desirable. I think we get about 300 for that. It would drop it a little, and 50 for the other one. But I still think maybe $200 range on that one. Here's another thing, depression glass, called depression glass, and a lot of you have a history background because it was made during the Depression. So ones that are more desirable are ones like this, the serving pieces, because you can find a lot of plates. They're common, but these, if they got broken, they're harder to come by, so they're worth a little bit more. So at auction, it's probably maybe not even $200 together here now, where it would have been a lot more. But if you find a rare pattern, you can look them up. You can get a book on depression glass. You can go to the library and dig one up if you have some you want to look at. Or now you can go to the internet. Everything's online, and you can find the pattern. And you can find some rare ones that may be more desirable. Here's Fiesta ware, and this is still kind of collectible. This is we got about $1,000 splitting this into groups, and so they do make modern copies of it now, but this is the older pieces, and I believe that the newer ones are the base is all on the newer ones isn't glazed where these are, but one kind of interesting note to these are the orange ones. They used a uranium glaze, so hopefully you didn't eat a lot off of those when you were younger. But I did an appraisal for someone who was taught science, and he said that he brought in a piece and had a Geiger detector and showed his class at the uranium inside there.
Do any of them have lead? Poisonous lead?
There might be some on the paint. I'm not sure. Here's some Fenton glass. This came out of Shrewsbury state. Not all Fenton, but a fair amount of it was. And this is hobnail and opalescent, cranberry and opalescent pieces. And it was brought well over $1,000, but glass markets dipped a lot, and I know we might not even get half that for it now. Here's something that's still collectibles are still strong. This is a Boston firefighter's hat, and there's a really good flea market in Harvard, Mass. If you ever get a chance to go in October, if you like antiques at all, it's one of the best ones around. I think, as it's almost all antiques. You don't get the T-shirt vendors and other people who go to a lot of flea markets. And so if you're an antique, somebody who likes antiques, this is a place to go. So I met a gentleman, and I was going to call him to auction some things, but unfortunately he had passed, but his daughter had me sell a lot of things for him. And this Boston firefighter's helmet drew a lot of interest, brought $1,000. And these are postcards. So these are real photo postcards. So you take a picture, and the back would be a postcard back, and you could write to your relatives and tell them everything was going good. And these happen to be Shrewsbury. So here's Balanced Rock in Shrewsbury. This is a little blurry. My picture's not great, but the old schoolhouse. So yeah, I know you all recognize it as Shrewsbury. But some of these are pretty desirable. If it's they could bring some real photo postcards. Rarer ones can bring over $100. Typical ones like this in the $25 range. This is half of a stereo view. So you'd have that stereo opticon, and you'd look at it, and but I just put this on here really to point out a couple things. There are multiple reasons people collect things, and so sometimes you'll get something that's has crossover appeal, and in this case it does. This is from, whoops, not too fast there. Let's try that again. Hit the wrong button. All right, there we go. So that's from Sheridan Springs, Vermont, and it's croquet. There's probably not a lot of croquet collectors nowadays, but if it were baseball and you had Sheridan Springs, you'd have people who collect both, and that can make the value increase on something. I mentioned to you furniture is not great, but there are some exceptions. Here's a piece of Mission furniture, and this is, there are some bigger names to look for. Gustav Stickley's a good one. LJ&G Stickley also made them. Limbert. But this one's by a company called Lifetime, and so you could see that has a straight lines on it, and it's all and this is quarter-sawn oak, and that brought $1,000 at auction. Here's a reverse painted lamp, and it was made by Pittsburgh Lamp Company, and these have come down a little bit, but I sold one recently. It didn't bring as much, but at the time we got $1,000 for that. Coins are always good, and it's the same thing where I mentioned about the metals, where you know it's going to be worth at least the metal involved of it. So if you have a roll of quarters and they're just silver quarters, you know it's worth at least the amount of the silver. But this is a rare one. That was a $20 gold piece, and it brought mid 2000s, I think 2400 for that one. And condition, again, is another thing that makes a big difference with coins. Gold, more gold is always good, and there are people who collect these little charms, and this one happened to be a $5 gold piece in it. And gold was down at the time, but it brought about 2,500. We sold some recently, some bigger ones that sold for about 5,000 each. His collectibles are huge. There's still people are willing to pay for those, and it makes a big difference on these things. This is a new issue where it was this giant puppet was its first time it appeared in a comic book, so that made it more rare and more desirable. So, but the other thing is the condition is very, very important. Collectors want it perfect, and they can, and you can get them graded. You can send them out to a company, and it's a 1 to 10, and the difference between a 10 and a 4 can be tens of thousands of dollars. So it's sometimes it's worth having them graded, but the ones that I see sell the best are Silver Age, which are the 60s, and the earlier ones, Golden Age. In fact, Golden Age comic, one of the first Superman comics, sold in the millions. So that's old comics. Collecting dust can be pretty valuable. Baseball cards, also important condition on it. So everything makes a difference. Like you could see very small dings here, but that makes a huge difference to collectors. The other thing is the borders. So that one's borders maybe a little bit off compared to the other one. Mickey Mantle is one of the better cards, though, and that was one of his first cards that brought it over $4,000. But if you had that perfect one, 10, you could be looking at 6 figures for that. Here's a quilt, nicely done, just to show you. There's a lot of things that people are still buying. That brought about $300 at one of our auctions. Barbie, it's good to have the original box with the items, and I'll tell you one quick story, and this is some secondhand information, but it sounded believable, where some Japanese toys were considered junk when they came over here. A lot of people, they're kind of cheap. You could buy them at the 5 and dime store back in the 50s and 60s, but now they've gotten a lot more popular, and some of the robots can go for tens of thousands of dollars. And Japanese collector was said to have been in a said to be in a show in New York City, and he bought one, and it came with a box. He was pretty excited. Then he went back to the dealer and he said, "This isn't right." And he said, "What do you mean it isn't right?" And he showed him the box, and instead of where the staples should have been, there was a photograph of the staples. Somebody had photocopied the box, and so that killed that deal. But fortunately, he found it before he left the show. But the box is important. Barbie's dropping a little bit. Things to look for. Oops, wrong button again. A lot of times you'll see that they had earrings and it gets green in here. That makes a difference. But this woman contacted me who I used to work with, and her father had gotten bunches of these. He bought railroad salvage, and those came in there. And so at the time we got about $300 for that. Again, boxes are important. This is several years ago, so was unopened, brought about $500. Here's a Tiffany pine needle frame. So if you look in the back, it'll say Tiffany Studios, and it has a number on it. But thing to check for, see the natural patina and the way the bronze has aged naturally. But now they make a lot over in the Far East, and they make and it's hurt the value of the real ones. So they've made copies, and they'll fake them. They'll put a little acid on there and make them look like they're real, and so that it's hurt the value. But that at the time was bringing about $4,000 for that frame. It was size was about as big as one of these. Advertising is always big. Those of you who watch some of the antique shows on TV, you can see, no, it's very desirable. And this is kind of an interesting story. I'll share it with you. There was an article in the Globe about the person who collected all these signs, and when the expressway was going through Boston, he went over by the Faneuil Hall area, and he picked up all kinds of signs that people were throwing away, and he rescued them, and the Globe did a story on him, and his wife called me to handle the estate. And this one had a wood frame. That was a $700 sign. This one was, I mentioned that gentleman who collected Boston things, and he picked up this lap desk, and lap desks, maybe $50, $100 typically, but the difference was that this one had a plaque on it, and it was, it belonged to General Butler from Lowell, Beast Butler they called him, because he he treated the people in New Orleans so terrible when when he was running the city. So not very popular there, but having the Civil War connection, it made it bring $1,000 at auction. Guns are always good. You got a Colt revolver here. Things to look for. Oops, get that right button yet. So condition is a huge thing. You can see it's got a little bit of wear. Another thing to look for is serial numbers. We want to find matching serial numbers all over the gun. You're going to probably find one under here. You're going to find it on the top of the barrel. Everywhere you can find it, you want to find a matching one, because sometimes people had parts of guns and they wanted to make one together, throw one together. So you want to find the matching pieces.
Can you still get shells for it, like ammo or bullets for it?
You probably could. If you, I never tried firing one, but I think you probably could. And that was 2,500. Here's some art. We do. Art's still very popular. There are plenty of people who collect art, and this happens to be local artist Joseph Greenwood, and he did a lot in this area, and I've probably sold 4 of his paintings. And this wasn't a huge one. I'll use my hands this big, but the interesting thing was that he did it in Mount Wachusett, and that was brought around 3,000. Here's a cello, and if you have a violin or a cello, things to look for are you look inside here. So you might get a flashlight and shine it in this side so you can see the writing here. And I found out it was an Italian cello maker, late 1700s, but it had a lot of damage. This was delaminating. Piece down the bottom was missing. You can see a split somewhere here. So it had some issues, but it's even in that condition, we had someone bidding by telephone from New York, and a local buyer from Boston bought it for $1,300. Here's I picked up 2 letters. I did an appraisal event at the Worcester Senior Center, and the people contacted me afterwards, and they had 2 letters that had been signed, had been written by Teddy Roosevelt, and he sent them to Charles Washburn, a local industrialist, and they were classmates at Harvard. And so Teddy was just talking about his summer. He had spent some time up in Maine and rowing in Oyster Bay in New York, and so it was small talk, but it was still had a lot of appeal, and interesting to have the history on Teddy, and of course his signature is always valuable. So for the pair of letters, we got over 4,000. And this is again from that person who collected Boston things, and so he knew that there was an estate that things were being tossed out of, according to his daughter, and went through the trash, found this, and he also found the deaccession papers from the Smithsonian, where it was Admiral Byrd's coat that had got deaccession. I don't know, almost ended up in the trash, and we got nearly $4,000 for it. Here's a really early weather vane. All this paint is original. The patina on it, the natural aging is just fantastic. And a friend of mine from Leicester said he got offered a couple $1,000 by someone who at Brimfield, and he said, "Do you think he said, I wish I took it. Do you think he could get $1,000?" And I called him up, and after the auction, told him went for $5,200. So I was pretty pleased. And these are another story. A woman came in with a pile of these posters, and she had them appraised somewhere for $200. This was a golf one, but a lot of them were in kind of rough condition. They were rips in them, but they were older. They were from late 1800s. There was Harvard Yale game. There was some of these. There were just some advertising, Harper's and other magazines, and she wanted me to put them in the auction that night, and I said, why don't you let me take a little time? I said, and she wanted, like I said, she wanted $200. I said, let me shrink wrap them and advertise them right for you, get them in the next auction, and they ended up going for $15,000. So it was good they didn't go in that auction. Just something different to show you. It doesn't have to be old, rare. Just a Hawaiian steel guitar brought close to $2,000. And here's this is 1924. Not a particularly rare date for pennies with these Lincoln cents, and we had a roll of 50, a little over a roll. The roll's 50, and we had 58 of them. And a woman who her father had worked with my father, we found coincidentally, called me and asked me to sell some things for her. And she showed up late to the auction, and so we all fought over who was going to tell her what they sold for, and it was $13,000. And the reason being, even though they're not a particularly rare date, the condition on them was just so great. They look like, you could see they look like they came out of the mint the day before. So they graded so high that they were worth that kind of money. Mid-century modern design things, very, very hot. Here's a piece of Danish teak, room divider, that brought $1,000. So, like I mentioned, a lot of furniture. If I get calls, I tell people that we just don't handle it. By the time I get a helper and a truck and move everything and take my percentage, it's not worthwhile. But something like this certainly is. And now here's a beautiful set of sterling silver, and it's a huge set, and you can see the ornate pieces. That's the kind of silver you're not going to scrap. You might do something with plain, you might do something with broken pieces, but you're going to do much better at auction. And
Is it dishwasher safe?
I wouldn't put it in one. I think you're better off to.
I think my mom might have some of that, and she sometimes washes it and it became a little tarnished, but not quite as good as that, but close enough.
Yeah, I can't say for sure, but I know I wouldn't run it through.
I wouldn't either, but
yeah.
So many people do.
Yeah, and so I teach a class on similar to this, and had someone who consigned it with me afterwards, and we got $15,000 for that. And this jug, it's you can see it's got some damage, but it's a 6 gallon, marked 6 up at the top, and you'll see a lot of them. The Norton Company made a lot of these, but this is a really early one. You can tell by the designs on it. This is much earlier than you're going to see with the Norton ones from the late 1800s, and that one, even with the condition issues, brought $3,500. Here's paintings. One of the things to check for, if it's a painting by a realist, like we looked at the Impressionist work earlier by Greenwood, and so you're not going to see the detail in the background. But if you got something like this, try to check in the. Oops, I forgot I got the pointer. Look in the background, and you'll be able to see how good the artist was. And this one happened to be very good. It was an English painting, Fox Hunt, by Buttner, Buttner, and that brought $750 at auction. And this has a Shrewsbury connection. I got a call from someone who said, I have a chest of drawers and it's similar to one that's in Paul Revere's house, and I'm always very skeptical when and it was prior to people emailing me pictures, so I was very skeptical when I went over, but I had a person who helped me. I said, this is nicest chest I've ever handled, and I have a friend who was fortunately has passed now, but he was a Korean War vet, and he's probably been selling antiques as long as I was alive at the time. So I always like to bring my finds over to him, and he said he estimated at $3,000 to $5,000, which sounded good to me. I'd never sold a piece of furniture for that amount before, but I had some people come to look at it, and from another state. And it was in a gated storage in Worcester, and I said, and they said, what do you think it'll bring? I said, well, the best I've got so far is $3,000 to $5,000. I said, what do you think? And they wouldn't look at me, and they started looking down at the floor, and so I thought it probably was going to go for more, and then as I let them out of the gate, they said, you're going to have a good night tomorrow, and so it went 8,000, 9,000, 10,000, 11,000. By the time we were done, it was over 20,000 for that piece. And it was a Portsmouth, New Hampshire cabinet maker. So that was one good find from Shrewsbury, and I'm going to show you another one a little later. Oh, here's these also came from that person who collected all the things from Boston, all the signs when they were putting the expressway through. So you got these. You got this sign that would have hung over a storefront in the 1800s, and so a lot of people coming from different countries, you didn't have to speak English to know that you could go in here and get your eyes tended to. Did have a little bit of damage here, a little bit of corrosion on each side, but still brought over 4,000. I had a colleague who specialized in coins, and he wanted to learn more about antiques and wasn't sure on this. So he gave me a bunch of Polaroid pictures and said, this person recreated a country store in Cleveland, Ohio. So I had to decide. I was hoping that it wasn't a lot of reproduction stuff, and I took a chance, and I flew him out with me, and we got out there, and over 90% of it was real. So, but this was a Pulver penny gum machine. So you'd put in your penny, and then the clown would do. It was a mechanical clown. It would move, and out would become your piece of gum. But there was an issue with it. The back had some wood here. It was replaced. And I had a person call me who said that he was a specialist in these Pulver machines. He said, with the wood, it's not worth that much. He said, I'll leave you $700 absentee bid, which sounded fine. But two people really wanted it at auction, got into a bidding war, and it ended up going for $7,000. So. And this, we sometimes I don't really have a huge truck to handle big things, but we have a couple options that we use. So in this case, I don't know, if any of you know Auburn, it's where the bowling alley used to be. I think Polar owns the building now. It's right at the town line on Southbridge Street. And this building was there. They had a gas station, and this was the building for the gas station. So it was marked here, had the plaque, 1910 somewhere. It had some issues. It was older, but we had. So instead of moving it to the auction hall, I had a preview in Auburn and invited people to come look at it, and some people showed up that day, and then we just sold it at the auction hall and brought over $3,500 for that. I should just mention one other thing that we do the auctions. I do these online auctions and estate sales. So when it's big things like this, I can sell them in an online auction, and it works out very well. I sold it's not in the slides, but I sold an Allison aircraft engine from a World War II airplane, and I had people, a lot of interest. Someone from Australia called me and was thinking about buying it, but it ended up at the Fighter Factory in Virginia, and so it was good because I could just leave it in the barn and I didn't have to move it. The person came in, got their riggers, and so a good way to sell big things. I mentioned clocks aren't that good, but in this case, this one was a nice carriage clock, and it had a New York maker on here, about this high, and drew a lot of interest. I had someone, a big dealer from New Hampshire, come and inspected it prior to the auction. It brought $12,000. This is something different, 1941 Chrysler Saratoga. Painting looks great, but it was repainted, so that makes a big difference. Again, collectors want everything as perfect as possible, and but it still brought $7,000, and some people in Natick bought it, and he was doing it all over. He says, it was in Worcester.
Oh, then I'm glad they heat with wood, because I heat with wood. I always like to see piles of fire. Out of the way, but it makes me feel happy that people do things the old-fashioned. I like seeing split wood piles.
Okay, yeah. No, they were wood heaters. Here's a couple of fire buckets, and I got these. I write a article, and it goes in the Stonebridge Press, which doesn't go into Shrewsbury, unfortunately, but Webster, Sturbridge, Spencer, and a lot of towns in Connecticut. And I got a call from somebody in Woodstock who had these, and the person's name was Baron Putnam, and you can see the condition on them is fantastic. We had the horns with them, and so the person who bought the clock came down, and he was also interested in this, but I wasn't able to get it. They sold for over $19,000, and the Maine Antique Digest did an article. They thought it was more, some of the highest selling fire buckets that have ever been sold. Here's a painting out of a Lexington, Mass estate, and it was John O'Brien, and I looked him up and did a little research on him, and he was a Canadian artist, and some of his works are in some of the Canadian museums. He you could see, I was hoping it would be an American flag here, which I think would have brought a little more money. American things will sell better in America, of course, and but it's still beautifully done. Again, this big, and maybe even a little bigger. But we had a lot of competition on it, and a doctor bought it, and he told me that he owned about 6 of them. He said he paid more, it went over 20,000, and he said he paid more than he typically does, but he wanted it. And he said that the O'Brien typically painted them only for captains, ship captains, or for people who own shipping lines. And here's another piece out of a Shrewsbury estate. Here's that other one was a Hepplewhite. This is a Hepplewhite too, and you can see the design. It's got the bell flowers. This is a veneer, and this has a swing leg, so it would open up and it would be a card table. But the swing leg had a break on it. And the people had moved it around. It was a younger couple, and they said they moved it around all over the place. You can see the moving label on here. And they said, "Do you think you could get $2,000 for it?" I said, "I think that shouldn't be a problem." And we ended up going for $22,600. It was a New York maker, and very desirable. One quick note to that, I had a buyer call me, and he said, what time is that going up? And we usually try to put the good things up early in the auction. It starts at 6. And so he said, I'm flying into TF Green, it's going to be close. And then I thought it was one of my regulars. And then I said, are you coming up here just for that? He said, yes. He flew up from the mid-Atlantic states to bid on it.
So how long ago was that?
That was probably 7 years ago or so. This book, this was a set of 4 volumes out of 5. I was missing one, but they had a lot of French posters, and they were this big, and I can't pronounce the name of the books, but posters by Toulouse-Lautrec and smaller ones, but they're still desirable. And so each book was this big, maybe had 50 posters in them each, and they would bring $5,000. They were bringing $5,000 each. Here's a 3.5 carat diamond that we got out of a Harvard Mass estate, and that went for over $30,000. And we did a radio auction. I got called by a person who was a longtime radio collector. So he had some of the first receivers and transmitters, some of the first commercially produced ones. And his collection was so big, he built a barn to house it all. And he called a few auctioneers, and we were fortunate enough to get the sale. And this one brought $16,000. The whole collection, we sold it in 2 sessions that went for $200,000 each, so $400,000. But the thing is that a lot of the collectors for these things just aren't buying them anymore. They're not. It's an older generation who collected these, and he said if he sold his collection 15 years ago, it would have been $1 million instead of the $400,000. But he was right on them. He knew exactly what it was worth. He said $400,000. We made just over. And that's the last thing I'll show you. I was fortunate enough to be collectibles appraiser on PBS Antiques Roadshow. And I didn't get to do it a lot because my daughter at the time was trying to get recruited for softball, and they do it in the summer. And so we were at tournaments all across the East Coast. And but I did have a weekend free, and I got to go to Miami. And people brought in, they had a pair of credentials and some other ephemera related to Elliot Ness. And I praised them at $30,000 to $50,000, but they had been offered $10,000. So they said that it wasn't going to be the jaw-dropping moment on TV where the people think it's worth $100 and you tell them it's worth $30,000 to $50,000. So I ended up in the newsletter, but not on the show with these. But I promoted it with a press release, and I had, typically my website will get 100, 200 hits a day, and that day I had 3,500 because of the press release I'd sent to a couple places in Chicago, because that's where he was well known for, for working. But he was also the safety director in Cleveland, and the Cleveland Plain Dealer picked it up, and then the Associated Press ran with it, and my phone was ringing off the hook for a while. We had all kinds of press on it. So, but they ended up in the National Law Enforcement Museum in Washington, D.C., and they went for $46,000.